personal computer is beginning to invade the home. In this house, the solar power is controlled and regulated by a computer. Here, the computer is used to entertain. Video games are programmed and the battle is waged. And Fred Wilkinson says he uses his home computer to store information and to learn.
It's a daily event. There isn't a day that goes by that either through a magazine or through the keyboard or through a program or through talking to somebody that I don't pick up more and more information. And it's a growing experience. I see that in myself, and I see it in other people who I deal with that started out much the same way I have.
Bonjour. I would like to transfer money from my employer's account. May I?
Well, stay.
At one of the traditional exchanges, Bitstamp, I think in 2014 or 2015, there was some kind of freeze function executed or whatever. And how does that work, and who decides how that's executed? And just tell us about that.
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. I'd love to explain that. So the XRP ledger has a freeze feature for assets other than XRP. So for example, you can represent legal obligations on the XRP ledger and you can trade them. So for example, if Bitstamp owes me 1 Bitcoin, I can trade that on the XRP ledger to someone else who can redeem it. Bitstamp treats that as a legal obligation. Now, legal obligations can disappear because of things that happen off the ledger. In this case, there was a dispute over the ownership of some of those funds. And Bitstamp made the decision to freeze those funds on the ledger, which is what they should do. If they're not sure whether they owe me a Bitcoin or not, the ledger shouldn't reflect the fact that they owe me a Bitcoin. Now, I just want to add this has no effect on XRP, and you can also create assets that don't reflect legal obligations. But that's what makes the decentralized exchange possible. Most digitized or collateralized fiat assets on the ledger are freezable by their issuer. So it's the issuer of that asset that can freeze it. So if you decide to accept dollars backed by, let's say, GateHub, GateHub can freeze those dollars, let's say if the government says that you can't withdraw them. So it's an actual legal obligation tradable on the ledger. Yes, it's strictly the issuer. And XRP isn't issued by anyone, so there's nobody who can freeze it.
How much would you like to transfer?
All of it, evenly over these accounts.
What this is trying to illustrate is if you deploy Interledger on some network, and we envision that there will probably be sort of a global instance of it, just like the internet has a global instance, then you have these different nodes, these little blue nodes here, and we call them connectors, but they're basically like routers in IP. So they basically take in packets on one side, they look at the destination on the packet, they compare it to their routing table, and then they forward that packet towards that destination. Whenever you look at any kind of blockchain presentation, there's a pretty good chance you'll see some kind of graphic that has nodes connected by lines, some kind of graph. And you'll hear things like Bitcoin is the TCP/IP of money. And when we hear that, we cringe a little bit, because if you know anything about how TCP/IP works and how Bitcoin works, they're very different protocols that do very different things in a very different way. And so the challenge that we always have when we talk about Interledger is it is actually a lot like TCP/IP.
Is this technology proprietary, or is this being used by other companies, and you guys are sort of catching up with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Ripple has been doing a great job the last several years, really going out and looking to work with a bunch of banks. I mean, they're real competitive ideology on XRapid, as it were, would be to compete with SWIFT today, right, which does a lot of the global banking, correspondent cross-border banking transactions. And so they think that, XRP, RippleNet, as they call it, kind of their global network of financial institutions, will begin to use this platform more and more. And I agree with that. I think at this point in time, however, a lot of those guys are doing what we did about a year and a half ago, which is, they're in pilot mode, they're testing. And what we're about to do is really, move this forward in a very large, tangible way.
It's done.